I'm just going to draw the numbers here. Who goes first? There you go.
So good evening everybody, welcome along to the Memorial Hall. My name is Chris Mann from BBC Radio Cambridgeshire, and we'll be recording what's happening here tonight and using some of it on the programme starting from tomorrow and then a bit more next week on the drive time show at about 5 o'clock. So let's meet the four candidates who are going to be talking to you tonight. And a reminder, this is all about you, it's your questions, it's obviously your decisions to make and where to put your two ticks on May the 5th. So let's meet the four candidates and welcome them to the platform. Gentlemen, first of all, Moss-Eccardt. They've drawn lots as to who's going to be speaking first and who's sitting where. So Rupert is here. Rupert grew up in Welney, is a former county councillor, helped set for the National Centre for Policing Excellence. Yeah? He now lives in Queen Adelaide near Ely and is employed by BT as a security consultant, and he's a Lib Dem candidate. Thank you. A round of applause, everybody. Sure. Second on yellow is Dave Baigent for the Labour Party. After over 30 years as a firefighter, Dave went to university to get a first degree and a PhD in uniformed service culture. He then wrote and led ARU public service degrees, lectured on policing for over 8 years, and more recently has become a Cambridge City Councillor for Labour. Dave Baigent. Number 3 is Jason Ablewhite, the Conservative candidate. Jason has lived in Cambridgeshire all his life. He's leader of Hunts District Council and until recently was chairman of the Cambridgeshire Police and Crime Panel, the body which oversees the Police and Crime Commission. Jason Ablewhite. And our fourth candidate is Nick Clark for UKIP. Served on the Cambs Police Authority before falling into politics. As the leader of Cambridgeshire County Council, he favoured action over bureaucracy, he said, and sought to run the council in a business-like manner. A lifelong Eurosceptic, he joined UKIP. Nick Clark. So we've asked them all to introduce themselves with a minute of why they are standing for Police and Crime Commissioner. So after the lots that they've drawn, let's hear first of all 1 minute from Rupert Moss-Eccardt.
Good evening everyone. So why vote for me? Well, I know I can reduce crime in the area. I can help make the force an exemplar for good practice. As you've heard, I grew up in Welney. I've lived in Cambridge at times. I now live in Queen Adelaide. I've worked based in Cambridgeshire all my working life. So I understand to a degree the force area and its complexities. I helped set up, as you've heard, the National Centre for Policing Excellence, and as part of that I already started to learn strategies that would reduce crime. So I know the techniques that work that will reduce crime. I intend to make the force open and transparent and make the office also open and transparent. I intend to set priorities locally, in public, making use of the community leaders who will help frame that priority setting. And so, why vote for me, as I said before, that I will reduce crime, I will improve the force, and I will be open and transparent. So please do vote for me.
Thank you, Rupert. Rupert Moss-Eccardt for the Lib Democrats. David Baigent for Labour.
Mine's a bit of an echo, I'm afraid. My name's Dave Baigent. I was the son of a police officer. I became a firefighter after 30 years. Went on to university to do a first degree in sociology. Wrote a PhD in uniform public service. Then went on to write and lead Anglia Ruskin's public service degree, which I designed specifically to prepare people to join the police service. I lectured on that degree on policing. After that, I became a city councillor. I've got a reputation as a can-do type person. I've been campaigning to be Police and Crime Commissioner by visiting people. I've visited over 30 villages, cities and towns. I've handed out over 5,000 leaflets personally, spoken to people, heard the messages that they're giving to me. It is my intention to continue this campaign if elected, to take senior police officers with me, to visit communities, to listen to their priorities, to agree priorities with them, and then set those priorities for Chief Constables.
And the opening address from Jason Ablewhite.
Thank you very much, Chris. I started my public service 16 years ago when I decided that actually I wanted to put something back into my community. Some 5 years ago, after I'd worked my way through the council structures, I became executive leader of Huntingdonshire District Council, one of the largest districts in the country with a turnover of around 100 million a year. In that time, I've done a root and branch reform of that particular council and have managed to take 34% out of the central costs by making huge efficiencies without taking anything from the front line. And that is the basic principle that I wish to take into the police force to protect the front line. As you will have heard, I've been the police and crime panel chairman for some time, and I've been on the panel since it started. So I'm aware of the challenges around the police and also been involved in the community panels for some years as well. So I think I am best placed to ensure that you have a force that is resilient, that is there when you need it, and that is one that is more visible, because I'm hearing time and time again we do not see a policeman, and that is something I want to fix. Thank you.
And Nick Clark for you, Kim.
Yes, good evening to you all. I believe I have the most relevant experience for this role. I served in the RAF for 22 years, have run successful companies and been an independent member of the old Cambridgeshire Police Authority. As the leader of the County Council, I drove efficiencies across the county whilst protecting frontline services despite significant cuts from this government. I am retired from full-time work and available to give this 100% of my time. I do not believe this role should be combined with that of being a councillor. It's just too important. I'm impatient of unnecessary bureaucracy and expect public services to be run efficiently and in the interests of the people they serve. It is time to take the fight to the criminals. The interests of law-abiding citizens and victims must take precedence over those of the criminals. I believe I have the energy, determination and experience to deliver on my ambitions to make Cambridgeshire the most criminal, unfriendly county in the country. Thank you.
Okay, right, well we've heard from our 4 candidates with their introductions. Let's ask some specifics of them. A reminder that questions from the floor are coming after this, but let's address them all with a few pointers here. Are we happy to go in this order, gentlemen, or do we want to mix it up?
Shall we all go around once and then alternate so?
Yeah, okay. So let's ask, what are your priorities? What would be your priorities if you were elected? Let's start with Dave Baton.
Okay. I think there's a number of priorities that push themselves straight to the front. Serious crime, child exploitation, domestic violence, all those things are automatically become priorities. But I want to prioritise what I'm going to call low-level crime. I want to prioritise reaching out to the people that are suffering from small things, because that's where criminals start. Criminals start at the bottom and work upwards, and if you can prioritise that and stop criminals from becoming criminals, then you can actually deal with that sort of area. I mean, as I say, there are a number of things that throw themselves automatically, and you come out with drugs and violence and things like that. But I think low-level crime, alcohol-related public disorder, those sorts of things, that's where I want to focus, because that's what the public have told me they want me to focus on.
Jason Edelwine.
Well, outside of the protection and enhancement of frontline policing, one of the biggest challenges we have in this county is around drugs and the crime that is related around those drugs, especially some of our city centres. Some of our rural areas will also suffer the effects of that as well, with burglaries. And I think that is one of the key areas that I want to tackle are the war on drugs. It is a huge problem for some of our city areas that I've already seen and talked to some people where there is open drug dealing in some of our city centres. And that's something that's got to stop, and it stops where you have a greater resilience on the front line. And you only have a greater resilience if you protect the front line, but you also enhance it and you look to new ways in which policing can increase the hours. So you see them, you feel more safe in your communities, and ultimately the criminals know that Cambridgeshire is not the best place to come and do their dirty business.
Nick Clark.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Priorities, that's interesting. I've got a manifesto on my website. Please have a look, and there's an awful lot on there. Luckily, this week I had the chance to validate it with the Chief Constable. He says they're all deliverable, which is good news. I want to be tough on crime. 2 Chief Constables ago, Julie Spence had a door-a-day policy. where she intended to make a drug dealer's life miserable every day of the year, and I will reinstitute that straight away. I want to improve public engagement. The current PCC, bless him, has really just not been visible to the general public, and that has to change. I want all papers that the police and the Police and Crime Commissioner publish to be by default in the public domain, published on websites so people can see it. Speeding in our communities, I'm told by everybody, it's just unacceptable. And the reason it's unacceptable is that there aren't enough policemen available. Since 2010 in Cambridgeshire, there has been an 8% reduction in police officers, and that's just not good enough. I will find more money, and the way I'll find more money is by reducing the cost of the Police and Crime Commissioner's office, my own office. I don't need a deputy, and the current costs have gone from 345,000 in 2009 to over 650,000 now. It's totally unacceptable.
And your priorities, please, Rupert.
Yes, rather than giving you a long list of crimes that I'm going to focus on, my main priority is to reduce crime. It's too late if it's happened. The important thing is to make sure it doesn't happen in the first place. There are proper, tried and tested ways of doing this. One of which, of course, is to make sure that if someone does commit a crime, it's the first and only crime, they don't go on to re-offend. So focusing on first offenders, giving them techniques like what's called restorative justice. You may find it worthwhile looking on Google for that. Well, if you make sure they don't do it again, then that is a win for us all. For prolific offenders, make sure that they have the choice, give up, or be focused on so they don't get the chance to do the further crimes once they come out of prison or out of whatever conviction route they've gone through. At the same time, it's important to make sure the police work for you. So when setting priorities for local policing teams, that will be done in public in the way you want. So in some places it's parish council meetings, other places neighbourhood panels, in the City of Cambridge area committees. All those things will help reconnect, it's important that we do, the people the police serve with the police. So the police become once again a force for policing by consent, and as Robert Peel originally set up, members of the public doing what the public would do, but just full time.
Okay, I'd like a one-word answer, it's not one word, a one-line answer here, gentlemen. I want to ask you all for a new idea that would cut crime in Cambridgeshire. Jason, to go first this time.
In one line, I think more police officers. It's as simple as that. More police means less crime.
Nick.
I want to set up zero tolerance teams across the county, whereby groups of officers and council officers descend upon communities on a random basis to reassure the public that they're there and to sweep up all the low-level crime, the inconvenience and the antisocial behaviour that plagues our communities.
Rupert.
As I've said before, reconnect the police and the public in a way that then we come to work together. It's important there's social cohesion, that people find it worthwhile interacting with the police.
And Dave.
Yeah, talking to people is key to this, and to do this I'm going to establish the role of a Peterborough constable whose role will be to walk around the city. That will be, a similar role will be set up in both Cambridge and in Huntingdon. If that works, we'll roll that out further.
May the 5th, as you know, is the second PCC election. The first in November 2012 was spectacularly unpopular with the public. Just 14% was the turnout nationally. So tell us, how are you going to excite the public, gentlemen, and also a key issue which you've mentioned, has been touched upon, and that is where the officers are going to be, what the staff are going to be, what are the costs going to be. Just as brief as you can. I think Nick's first to go this time.
Okay, let's deal with that one first of all. I think it's a big mistake to remove the Police and Crime Commissioner from the police headquarters. Whilst there are formal engagements at committee level with the Chief Constable, and also an awful lot of influence and decision making can be made on a one-to-one basis. So the Police and Crime Commissioner, if I'm elected, we will be moving straight back to Hingebrook the second day. What was the other question, Chris? Sorry.
There was such a low turnout last time. How are you going to
Okay, well, I'm going to excite you all here tonight, I'm not sure, but what we need to do, any of us, whoever's elected in the next 4 years, is to make a much, much bigger stand on a national level, fighting for fair funding for Cambridgeshire's police force. We've seen exactly the same thing happen with school funding, and after an awful lot of work on my part and others, fairer school funding is on its way. We have to do that nationally. We have to start influencing the Home Office to spend its money more wisely, and the Home Office has got to champion the Prime Minister to get better funding, because we police with the consent of the people in this country, and we've got very low level numbers of police officers, but we need to have sufficient. I don't believe we have sufficient at the moment.
The low turnout, obviously, partly was that nobody knew what it was all about. The Home Office messed up publicity, good and proper. What a surprise, they're not very good at democracy there. There will be a higher turnout this year because, of course, some places have a local council election at the same time. It's also more in the summer rather than in the November cold evenings. But nonetheless, even with the low turnout, some PCCs still have more votes than MPs. And this time around there'll be lots of PCCs, and even losers will end up getting more votes than people sitting in the House of Commons supposedly representing you. Nick touched on Camborne. That clearly was a tactical blunder by Sir Graham Bright. He wanted to do it separating from the police, but that did not work, because he still uses the police's IT systems and other services, which means that actually Camborne is incredibly expensive for what it is. So Hinchinbrook is obviously a place to consider moving back to for saving some money. Money can be also saved in other areas. The current police and crime plan has money being spent on things I would not spend it on. There's a thing called eSINs, for example, which isn't necessary if the Project Athena that we're also spending money on is successful. It's one or the other. That's some hundreds of thousands of pounds altogether. And I will not hide from you, I will probably put up the council tax as much as I can within the allowance for the Police and Crime Commissioner, because it is still cheaper for you to pay as much as I could possibly raise that way than to have your insurance premiums go up the amount it would do if crime picks up in Cambridgeshire. So it's a better value for you to spend a small amount on the council tax and a larger amount on your insurance, or worse still, being a victim of crime.
Thank you. I spent some time yesterday with the Chief Constable and established that the suite of rooms that was set aside for the Police Commissioner is still available at Hinchinbrook headquarters, so I too have agreed that I want to move there. But I also want space in other places. I have a laptop. Most of us are prepared, or I am prepared, to hot desk. So I want to move around the county. I want to be available in different police stations throughout the whole county. So perhaps not such a big presence at Hinchinbrook, but definitely to move there. The low turnout, well, that was unfortunate. That's what happened. People are now more engaged. I've noticed when I'm talking to people, and people are saying to me, oh, thank goodness, we've seen somebody that's actually standing as a candidate, and I'm able to explain to them, hopefully to try and get through to them the importance that this role has, because it is a role that makes the police accountable to the public. I will be that person that the public can approach, and I too will engage with the Chief Constable. Stopping cuts, absolutely essential. We've since 2010, we've seen 18,000 police officer jobs go. We've seen 100 go in this county. We've seen police PCSOs go within the county. It's a problem. It's got to be stopped. People have got to be engaged because that's what they want. And what I'm saying is to people, vote for my CV. Don't vote for a politician.
Jason, staffing and costs and exciting the public.
Absolutely. The first job that I did when I became leader of Huntingdonshire District Council was move my office next to the chief officers. It's absolutely fundamental that if you're going to have a good working relationship, that you're going to drive out central costs, and most importantly, that that person knows exactly how you feel, what the direction is, where you want to go, and be absolutely clear in that you have that office next door. I cannot see the point in the Police and Crime Office being in Camborne, and I've already intimated that I would move to Hinchinbrook headquarters. I think it's absolutely imperative. I think when it comes to engagement, if you take the reduction in police officers that we've heard this evening, between 2010 and 12 was the greatest reduction that we've seen in our area. And if there was ever a reason to vote for a police and crime commissioner, it is because the minute a commissioner comes in, you have that direct accountability between the public and the commissioner, and you have in essence, a way in protecting the front line. And if you look at what Sir Graham's done since that time, police numbers have remained static, they're now steadily on the increase. That is where we need to be. We need to be in that direction. We need to ensure that we have a greater resilience on our front lines. So when we have 3 officers going off on one particular job, that there's no one covering an area. And we need to ensure that fundamentally, we have a force that is fit for purpose. I would reduce the cost of my office. I went down at Huntingdonshire from 23 senior officers down to 5. And I think when it comes to police officers, we have to completely distance ourselves from what is a frontline policeman and what is in essence a manager further up the chain. And is there a new way of doing things? So my view is of the world, yes, reductions, but reductions on the back office, not on the front line.
Nick Clark.
I started actually.
Did you?
I'll have another go if you like.
Now I've got a better question for you. So who's starting now? It's you. Okay, right. Yeah. Let's have an end of term report on the current PCC. So Graham Bright, how good or bad a job has he done?
I think the good news is that he did no harm, relatively harmless. Whether he promoted the role, probably not been particularly visible, but on the other hand, with both the previous Chief Constable and Alec Wood, he hasn't interfered in a way that has visibly caused more crime, has not caused real trouble. But on the other hand, against the current background, it might be better if someone were there who could perhaps make the police more engaged, more engaging, and help reduce crime.
Yeah, well, let's start with something positive. He set the office up. He cut the police. He cut the backroom staff, so now we have a situation where 50% of a constable's time, and there are men and women in the police, 50% of constable's time is spent in the police station, and he's not engaged with the public, and he did the job part-time. He didn't challenge the government over cuts, and I think that generally he doesn't get a very good report from me.
Formerly, of course, of you, the same party as you, Jason. Are you a fan of what he's done?
I think the biggest problem with a lot of the stuff that Sir Graham has done is nobody knows about it. One of the, if you like, I wouldn't say failures, but one of the biggest problems that I've found as the chairman of the Police and Crime Panel is that a great deal is going on in the background, and myself and Nick attended a seminar, and we both agreed that there's a great deal going on, a great deal of positive going on, but actually nobody knows about it. And I think that one of the things that if you were going to say he's done a great job, he has protected the front line. Some officers have gone further up the chain, which you'd restructure to do. But I think, you know, in protecting the front line, I think that's the most important thing. That is the thing that people really do care about. I think in terms of engagement, it's not been great, and I think we all acknowledge that. I think from a police and crime panel point of view, I think one of the challenges that we've had and some of the frustrations that we've had is that some of the information that we've asked for, although everything done by the letter of the rules as set out by government, if you ask for anything outside of that, it's not been forthcoming. And I think that has to change. I think if you want proper engagement, I think if you want a panel to work effectively as a scrutiny panel, then fundamentally, I think you need to be able to get that information out. And I think that's what I'd fundamentally do differently. It's got to be public engagement first.
Nick Clark.
Yeah, thank you. Without wishing to reiterate everything that people have said, I'm going to take a little bit more of a positive spin on this actually. He has done some very good things. So he has met his obligations to work within the budget. And I understand better than most how hard it is to work within reducing budgets. So he must be given credit for that. I think he also must take credit for being involved with bringing forward new IT systems for officers who can now report faults and activity out on the streets, because that helps to cut down their time in the office. I have to say he has been almost invisible to the general public, and he did get elected on the basis that he would represent the people and be seen by the people, something that he's missed that. My biggest criticism, and I fear, and I know this is a fairly conservative area, shall we say, the relationship between the Home Office, the Police and Crime Commission is conservative, and, sorry Jason, but the chairman of the Police and Crime Panel is also conservative, has been far too cosy. What Cambridgeshire needs is a bit of grit, a bit of muscle, a bit of determination when dealing with central government to fight its corner. and we just haven't seen that. It could almost have taken Sir Graham out of the picture, and it would have made no difference, because I'm sure our very able Chief Constable would have carried on through. The other thing I'm really concerned about is that there's something called collaboration going on. The government has pointed a finger at Cambridgeshire Constabulary and said, you must collaborate, and they've pointed at Hertfordshire and Bedfordshire, whilst of course at the same time saying for devolution they pointed towards Norfolk and Suffolk. The collaboration project, I think, is flawed. Whilst I agree with collaboration of back office functions, they're also collaborating on road policing teams, armed response units and dogs. And unfortunately we have a serious issue in Luton with terrorism. We have the M1 and the A1, and these act as huge pulls for our teams from Cambridgeshire being pulled west. I think that's a mistake. I think collaboration on a case-by-case basis works. I think collaboration in an end of its own, which it is at the moment, is a mistake.
Okay, thank you, Nick. And almost ready for your questions. Just one more to the panel. Have you got yours ready? Steve Jackson's out there with the microphone ready to leap on you. One last question of the panel. I think we're starting with Dave. Have you ever broken the law?
I got caught for speeding once.
That's your confession.
That's my confession.
Jason.
I've been caught speeding a long time ago, and I'm pleased to say I now have a clean licence. So outside of that, the answer is no.
Criminal activity, Nick Clark?
Yeah, of course I have. I'm going to be the honest one here. So speeding, I can say categorically I have never taken an illegal drug in my life. If I had been, the RF would have something to say about that. But I do remember scrumping apples down in Cornwall with my granddad, and I fell out the tree, and we both got chased off the land by a couple of dogs. So that's my confession.
Rupert.
I have currently no recorded convictions. I have an SP30, exceeding the speed limit from some years ago. I did more recently attend a speed awareness course, and I have broken the law in the past, but with a warrant and authorisation so to do, but I can't tell you what that was.
Oh, mysterious. Okay. All right. Thank you so far, gentlemen. It's your turn. Questions, please. The lady at the front. Steve's just coming towards you now, so hang on a second, so we can recall your question.
Gail Kenny, County Councillor. It seems to me that the police force at the moment has very low morale. How are you going to help that, and how are you going to improve it?
Low morale in the police force. Jason Eberwine for the Conservatives.
I think it's given them some certainty. One of the biggest challenges around local government is morale of local government officers as well. And it's because you're going through a constant change, a constant flux. There's a lot you can do in terms of working with your officers, in terms of we established a staff council that's outside of the unions. It allows individual members of staff to portray their individual issues so that senior managers can look into them and deal with them. One of the other things that you will find, again, it comes back to trying to improve the front line and increasing officer numbers, is that if you are constantly under pressure, if you are called to the middle of Cambridge and you're in Huntingdon because there's no one at another station, and then you're called off somewhere else, it is a constant treadmill of work. Where it would help is if they became almost, some of them, community officers as they used to be. Not saying the Bobby on the beat as he used to be in the 60s, but actually community support officers are hugely important to our communities. We have seen a reduction in those. There is an increase in those going on at the moment with the new Chief Constable in alignment with the Police Commissioner. And that was something that I fundamentally support. Because I think if you take away that pressure, then they will improve in their performance. You will get a lot more out of them. You'll have less days off sick. And as a result of that, you get a greater resilience, even more so on the front line.
Nick Clark, for you, as a former member of the Cambridgeshire Police Authority, would you agree that there's low morale in the police force?
I think in certain areas that there are actually, yeah, there's a problem. One of the problems they face, if you speak to, for example, those that carry weapons to protect us, is the biggest fear they have is not coming up against somebody with a gun, it's the fear of being arrested soon after they've shot somebody for murder, actually, and then having to be almost turning it round. The assumption is that they've done something wrong and they have to prove differently. I think that's wrong. I want to stop political correctness, actually. I think a no-nonsense approach to policing would be very welcome by the police officers. Make them feel confident that they can make decisions on our behalf, and the single test must be, were their actions in the best interests of the people they serve? And if that's the case, then the PCC should back them. If they know they're going to get backed, it makes life much easier. I think the other thing is we've got to try and do something about criminals constantly revolving through the courts with non-custodial sentences, back on the streets, committing the same crime the very next day. And that really does sap morale of the police, who spend hours and hours and hours trying to find the criminal, and they get let off again. So something on the national stage about that is important. And if the Police and Crime Commissions take on the responsibility for the CPS, Crown Prosecution Service, which they're talking about, that's a particularly good area that we can start looking at to stop that happening.
Rupert Moss-Eccardt, do you agree with that suggestion on the CPS? And how would you raise the morale of police officers in Cambridgeshire?
There are some areas where I fundamentally disagree with what Nick has said. One of them is indeed, it is important that law enforcement is separate from the criminal justice system. In particular, the whole Judge Dredd scenario, I mean, that's a bit extreme, but I want to avoid that. More importantly, you do not want to have to burden the police with understanding the whole richness of the law. That is best done by those people who focus on those things. There is this concept of the omnicompetent police officer. You expect a police officer to turn up at something and be able to cope. Being able to cope with freezing a scene, dealing with locals, dealing with victims, apprehending suspects, is enough to be doing without then also expecting to be fully conversant with the huge breadth of UK law. There's a ton of it, and nobody really understands it, but some people spend it all day, every day learning it. It is not for the police to have to be expert lawyers. In terms of morale, mental health in the police is suffering at the moment. It is a very bad situation, getting worse. Some of that is about the pressures of the work, but it's about making sure that they have the respect of both senior officers, their other employers, the PCC in particular, but also reconnecting with the public. It is unfortunate that these days the police are often seen as being people who aren't the same as the rest of us. That has lost one of the bases of UK policing. Policing by consent is often described as I've talked about some of the PDM principles already. So we need to be sure that we support the police because they support us. And that's part of reconnecting, being open, being transparent, being effective, being responsive. And when the police start getting help from the public spontaneously, more and more, that helps with mutual respect and that helps reduce crime too. One of the things to also work on is helping the chief officer reduce the amount of what might be termed canteen culture. There is this tension amongst police officers that they have a duty, of course, to the public, they have a duty to the law, but also often there is this implied bond with their colleagues, and sometimes that puts them in a very difficult position. Helping them escape that is great.
Dave Bagent for Labour, you spoke earlier on of your work with uniformed service culture. So do you recognise these problems, and what solutions do you have?
I think that inherently in uniform public services there's a tendency to moan about things anyway. They talk to each other, they moan to other people. I think that is part of the canteen culture. But it's not surprising that they're stressed, is it? The job cuts within the police service have been enormous. The amount of crime is on the increase. More responsibility, more openness, more requirement to do more work. As other services are cut, the police become not only a policing service, they also become a social service. They have things thrust on them that should not really be their job. Their pensions have been cut. They are having to work an extra 10 years and they're paying increased pension contributions. That doesn't help things. They're not connected with the public. They don't have time to talk and do their job properly. It's important that we create this link back with the public. It's important that they recognise that the commissioner who's in charge of them is not coming in to change the service, to cut everything, but is somebody who comes from a similar culture. I know what it's like to carry out emergency work. I know at first hand how difficult and traumatic that can be. I am able to talk to police officers at the same level and about the same sort of work that they are doing. They need to re-establish their job satisfaction. They need to re-establish the respect that the public is supposed to have for police officers, and that needs to be achieved. That's the sort of thing that a commissioner can help with.
Okay, thank you for the question on police morale. Let's take another one from the audience here. Would you identify yourself before the question? Thank you.
Hello, Peter Fane. I think it was Rupert who mentioned the question of reoffending rates. We've seen a massive increase in the numbers in prisons over the last 20 years, and we've also got an appalling failure, it seems to me, in that 2/3 of young people released are back again in prison within a year. And I'm wondering what we can do about that. Do you take the view, to the extent it's a matter for the Police and Crime Commissioner, that prison works, we should see even more people in prison, or do we have to find other ways of reducing that reoffending rate?
How do you cut reoffending? Nick Clark for UKIP.
Yeah, clearly, rehabilitation is another part of the criminal justice system that has been failed for a number of years. If you take that alongside the cuts to local authority funding, like the county council wanting to provide social services to people, to vulnerable people, the funding that came from central government to help those that were in trouble on the streets, and the cuts to the mental health service as well. Far too many people with mental illness end up in prison cells, which shouldn't happen. But I think we mustn't ever walk away from the fact that in society we have good people, not so good people, and bad people. Bad people need to sometimes be locked up in order to protect the good people and the not so good people. And if we don't build sufficient prisons for a population that has gone up, in my lifetime, from about 45 million up to nearly 75 million now, if we don't build sufficient prisons, it will always be a problem. The cost of providing the correct amount of prisons for this country will be £2 billion. The estimated annual cost of crime is 34 billion. You need to do the maths on that one.
Okay, Rupert Moss-Eccardt for the Liberal Democrats. Throw away the key?
Certainly not. One of the key things is that prison does not work. Michael Howard was wrong about that and many other things. There are obviously reasons for people who are kept in prison. If they are a danger to society or a risk or are likely to reoffend and it's provable so, they should stay in prison. But if you're a first-time offender, going to prison for a short period does nothing other than teach you more skills as a criminal. There is in Cambridgeshire an integrated offender management strategy that has been implemented adequately. As Nick has said, county council cuts recently haven't helped. The ridiculous decision by the county council to not increase the council tax effectively is one of the biggest dangers to our police service, because as Dave has said, at the bottom, the police end up sweeping up the mess created by other local agencies if they don't do their jobs properly. So social services, mental health, all those things, the police end up picking up the bits.
Dave Bajan, how do you stop reoffending? What is your
I mean, there is
answer?
a need. There is a need to lock some people up. There is a need for people to be taken
Is that
out.
the power of the PCC though? You've all said that, but can the CCC
I
affect
was just
that?
going to say, I don't think that's the PCC's job. The PCC is to ensure that we have a police service that represents the public. The PCC is involved in restorative justice. He is involved in rehabilitation schemes. I think that's where the focus is. It's not for the PCC to widen this job wider than it is. It's a really big job. It is an enormous job. To do it properly, you need to be involved in rehabilitation, you need to be involved in restorative justice. I visited the Dawn Project in Cambridge at the Women's Resources Centre, where they're acting as a probation service and they are helping women who have broken the law to get back into society. PCC's got some money to spend in that area, but to talk about how long you're going to lock people up and things like that, that's not PCC's job. There's a justice system for that.
Jason Aylward.
I think there's a personal side. I know it's not the job of the Police and Crime Commissioner, but actually I've always fundamentally believed that the punishment should match the crime. And I think at times we are too soft with some of our criminals, especially when they prey on the most vulnerable of our society. I was intrinsically involved in some of the programmes that they had at Little Hay Prison, which is youth offenders, or was a youth offenders at the time. And it was absolutely heartening to see some of those young people who I felt genuinely wanted to get out and make something of their lives, which of course is always a job once you've been inside, you know, trying to convince employers to actually give them a chance in the first instance. If they don't, it's so easy for them to drift back into crime. So restorative justice and the way that the Police and Crime Commissioner can play a vital role in that is absolutely intrinsic to what goes on in the future. One of the other things that we need to do is ensure that we work with all of our other strategic partners, because you are more likely, in fact 3 times more likely, to get into crime if you come from a depraved area. And it's driving up standards for people. It's giving people opportunities that really matter out there. Because if you've got the right opportunities, you've got the right chance in life, then you are less likely to be involved in criminal activities.
I'd like to move on to another question if that's all right.
Sorry, Chris, just for sake, just for clarity, I think Jesse meant deprived, not depraved.
It may well be both, we don't know. There's a couple of gentlemen there and another one there. Who's first here? Could you just identify yourself? Thank you.
Certainly. Simon Told, I'm the priest in charge of Great Shelford and Stapleford. My father was in the fire service, not in this county, but in a nearby county for over 30 years. We hear proposals from central government as they seek relentlessly to squeeze out public spending, that a good wheeze would be to ask the PCC to take on responsibility for the fire service as well as the police service. I'd be interested to hear the views of our candidates on that proposal, which may be coming down the tubes not too far distant.
It's you now, is it? Okay. Yeah, okay. So, should the PCC also be responsible for the fire service as well as the police service? Rupert Moss-Eccardt.
So there is a bill going through Parliament at the moment that will require a duty to collaborate. It's up to the local people to some extent through the fire authority, local councils and other things, for a case to be made as to the level of collaboration that is necessary or appropriate. I would argue that the fire service and the police service are 2 different services. Just because they both have blue flashing lights on the roof doesn't make them very similar. However, the police service does have some stuff to learn from the fire authority and the fire service, in that historically you expect the fire brigade to run into burning buildings, bring people out and then put the fire out. That's not the best thing to be done. What fire service has done more recently is focus on risk management, reducing the likelihood of a fire starting in the first place. Smoke alarms, other fire education. So having the police focus more on stopping the crime happening is a good thing. But this collaboration is not going to work. They're different organisations.
Dave Bagent, 30 years as a firefighter, would you welcome them both being under the same roof?
I've got the CV to do that job really so easily, but I'm really against it. The police are the arm of the state. The fire service have an entirely different role. They work with the public and for the public in a very different manner. To mix those 2 up would result in police officers being on fire appliances, fire officers being in police cars. It doesn't work. It might seem like a wonderful cut, but it doesn't work. What, as Rupert says, the police have got to learn from the fire service. They can learn about crime prevention, the way that the fire service has reached out to provide prevention in homes. But they've only done that because of one thing, because they have a positive image and people welcome them into their homes. That is not the same for the police service. They collaborate already. Rest assured that when I was fighting fires or attending road traffic collisions, the police and the fire service work very, very closely together. They have embarkation lines, they know when they can cross them, they know when they don't. But mixing them up under one commissioner, that's just about saving money and increasing bureaucracy.
Jason Ablewhite, it's a Conservative idea. Does the Conservative candidate support it?
I do, and not surprisingly I do. And the reason I do is I recognise that the 2 are very different services and they should be run as 2 different services. But I think there is a bigger question here, about how those two individual authorities are currently being run. If I take the fire service, you've got a £34 million organisation being run by a chief fire officer on £200,000. You have a £129 million organisation with a chief police constable who is on £154,000. There are people in the fire service and the communications team on over £100,000 a year. We're not talking about the front line. We're not talking about how the fire or the police operate. This is fundamentally about getting rid of some of the top tier and collaborating in the back office. If you look at Hinchinbrook Park, I live about 7 miles from Hinchinbrook, and you have a police headquarters next to a fire headquarters, which it makes absolute sense with the fire service looking to have a new headquarters for the two to collaborate, have a shared facility, shared back office, shared HR even. You know, all of the things that you can collaborate with while keeping the services totally separate in the way that they're run on the front line. And I think the only way you can bring that together is if you've got somebody coordinating that from the middle.
Nick Clark, you said in your opening statement that you favour action over bureaucracy. So for UKIP now, do you agree with your former Conservative colleague?
We don't need to keep mentioning UKIP or Conservative in this sense. It's about me standing for election as Nick Clark actually with the UKIP badge. But let me go back to this. I have an interest in this. It needs examining very carefully. Now, I know that the current fire authority is completely and absolutely undemocratic. When I was the leader of the county council, I used to appoint people to the fire authority, and they would be put there through patronage. If I'd sacked them from my cabinet as a good soft landing place for them, if there's any troublemakers, I'd always push them out to the fire authority, and 1 or 2 stars went in there as well. I'm being slightly flippant. But it was never democratic. You could not hold those people to account because they were elected county councillors, but not in the role of the fire authority. In the same way, the old police authority was completely unaccountable as well, and I was an independent member, but I was just sort of interviewed and signed up for it, and then there were 9 county councillors. So I think bringing the fire authority or replacing it with something that is more democratic makes sense. I don't think there's any discussion about sharing operational command and control. I don't think that's on the agenda whatsoever, and I don't think necessarily at the moment that's appropriate. But if a PCC is responsible as the agent for governance and control and funding for the 2 organisations, then, like Jason, I think there may be some sense in it. Because there are cases, for example, in Ramsey, when the police station closed, the fire station is there, and why didn't the police park themselves in with the fire station? And there's no jolly good reason why they didn't, except...
But they do that. They do that currently.
Well, they don't actually. They actually sit in the library. So not the fire
Not
station.
in Ramsey, but the police and fire service do share fire stations.
Thank you, Dave. But in Ramsey, as I say, they're actually in the library at the moment. If they were together, that would be helpful. Making assets count, which is the policy of trying to share all the public realm amongst all organisations, including district councils and county councils, has a really tough time moving forward. And the reason being is there's no joint ownership. And each of those organisations, whilst they say they want to share, at the last minute it's, yeah, but I'm not sharing my bit quite as much as I want of your bit. And if this brought that together and helped solve that, I think there are savings to be had. But I think operationally, the 2 services are separate. Let me just finish, Chris, very quickly. Running the county council, I had to look after the social services for children, adults, highways, and all the rest of it. Very different services. But you can, as a county councillor, as Gail will tell you as well, you can do that. It is perfectly okay under one umbrella to manage different disciplines.
Okay. Now, how many questions before we get to the line? Let's try and squeeze as many of these in so that be as brief as possible. We haven't had a lady yet. So you're after this gentleman who's waited very patiently.
Chris Gale's a lady, I'm sorry.
Beg your pardon.
John Paul. You are intending to replace the outgoing incumbent. You clearly have different ideas about what should be done to what he has. I'd be interested to know what the working relationship is between you and the Chief Constable, particularly if you both don't agree on what should be done. And at the end of the day, we've heard about accountability. To whom are you accountable at the end of the day, particularly if the policies that you implement are found not to be successful?
Presumably you're accountable on May the 5th and the time after that. The relationship with the Chief Constable, just a quick one on that. What do you expect it to be like? You're the boss?
Well, I think that the Chief Constable knows that. I mean, enormously polite to me yesterday when I met him, and I'm only a potential commissioner, so I would expect it to be respectful. Chief Constable has his job to do, or her job, but in this case a he. I think that it's one where you talk to each other and you solve problems through talking. If it can't be solved through talking, then ultimately the Commissioner has the final sanction in that they can replace the Chief Constable. There is a liaison committee of politicians and lay members, and that committee has a responsibility to question the PCC. It is my intention to increase that responsibility for that committee, because I think almost the PCC is autonomous, and I think that much power in that organisation is not a good thing.
Jason Applewhite is the current Chief Constable, who's of course had his contract extended. Doing a good job, is he?
I think he is, actually. I was very privileged to be part of the Police and Crime panel who interviewed the Chief Constable in public. It's not very often you get that with senior officers in local government. And I've built up already a relationship through that organisation with him. And I think I know that I'd get on very well with him, because that relationship is the key one. It's like a council leader with a chief officer. If you don't agree on anything, it's actually destructive for the whole council. And it's exactly the same with the relationship with the Police and Crime Commissioner and the Chief Constable. Ultimately, any chief officer will want clear direction. And as long as they've got clear direction, they know exactly where you are coming from, then I think the relationship is always good. I would expect healthy challenge, and there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But fundamentally, the working relationship has to be a strong one, and it has to be in order to deliver the aspirations of the Commissioner and indeed the Chief Constable himself or herself.
Nick Clark? There was only one candidate, of course, for the new Chief Constable's job, wasn't there?
There was. I think that's actually a national problem in the way that Chief Constables are promoted from Deputy Chief Constable, which I think is another issue that needs looking at some point in the future by somebody else. But look, first of all, who is the PCC accountable to? Well, it's to the people of Cambridgeshire, first and foremost. And that must be through the ballot box, May the 5th, but also must be through the other working committees and infrastructure that are put in place. So, crime and safety partnerships, the police and crime panel. I would certainly submit myself to that, as I used to with scrutiny panels on a much more regular basis, and be open to challenge both publicly and privately if necessary. The working relationship is interesting because, of course, I did that with the Chief Executive, Mark Lloyd, and the County Council. And it's very much a case, it's a bit like a chairman and a Chief Executive of a large multinational organisation, actually. The chairman is trying to set the general direction of travel, and the Chief Executive contributes to that. And jointly you come up with a policy and a strategy, the way forward, and then the chairman holds the Chief Executive to say, you know, you said you do it by June and it's September now and it hasn't happened. It should be constructive, there should be tensions there as well, and it should be about making sure that whatever is done for the right reasons for the people of Cambridgeshire, not just because the rules or the guidance indicates it should be done that way. And that's where we should really be held to account.
Rupert?
Yes, I intend to have a good working relationship. I work with a large number of chief constables and senior and ACPO rank chief officers already in my day job, and I find that Nick talks about national problems, sort of there, but the fact that they go through the same training, the senior command course, which I used to run at Brand Hill at one point, produces people with, over the years, similar viewpoints, similar approaches, which means the professionalisation does occur at that level. The College of Policing actually has now set up a professional body for policemen for the first time. So it's a bit like knowing if you go to a doctor, you'll get the same, well, roughly the same service, and apart from bedside manner, You know their competency is there. So they are professional police women too, increasingly, which is good. So my job as Commissioner would be to provide the accountability, the political balance. Accountability is indeed to the ballot box. Not everybody realises that actually there is a power for the Home Secretary to also intervene and replace PCCs if they feel that they are risking the social cohesion or whatever else of the authority. Setting objectives clearly for the Chief Constable is important, incentivising him with progress. One thing I will say is people ask, why do you have political party members standing for PCC? Is that a bad thing? Is that a good thing? Actually, in terms of accountability, it is sort of a good thing, because if I wear the Lib Dem badge, the Labour, etc., the party is also applying pressure to make sure you don't make the party look bad. So there's a more in-job pressure than just waiting 4 years until the ballot box. There's more consistent requirement to do the right thing. But that, some people may say that's a good thing or a bad thing, but accountability is essentially to the voters. But I will not pretend that the PCC role is proper democracy.
Okay, another question. The lady there is waiting. Thank you.
Mary Talbot, there have been many repeated tragic cases of an inadequate police response to women who are victims of domestic violence. If you're elected as Commissioner for this county, how will you tackle this?
Dave Bagent.
Okay. I find it hard to understand why there have been these tragic cases. I know that they've taken place. I think that there has been the police service is a masculine culture. It suffers from a slightly macho, masculine type of organisation. I think it's tragic. It needs to be attended to. I'm sure the current Chief Constable is attending to that, and I will be talking to him about that immediately I got to be elected PCC. I think that the idea that these things are pushed to one side because they happen within the home is unacceptable. The levels of domestic violence are scary. I mean, we talk between 60 and 80% of women have been attacked by their long-term partners. That is an unacceptable situation. It's difficult for our society even to understand that.
Could you just tell us why you've asked that particular question?
Only because it has simply because it has featured a great deal in the news recently, many recent cases, all over the country.
Jason Ablewhite.
Well, of course, our very own Home Secretary has highlighted that very point as well. It is one of those really heinous crimes that has gone unreported for so many years. So in some respects, it's very good that people are finding the strength, victims finding the strength to report these crimes. It is one of the biggest spikes in crime at the moment in the UK, for whatever reason, and that has to be tackled. And it doesn't just have to be tackled, but we've got to remember the most important person in this whole scenario every time is the victim. And there are some great examples of other forces which I would really like to investigate, I'd like our Chief Officer to investigate, whereby if you have a report of domestic violence, quite often the partner is taken away and put in a cell and interviewed, which quite often leaves the victim there on their own. If they've got no family around them, it leaves them there on their own. In some other areas, they have brought in the third sector, volunteers, which work very well within this criminal area, and they brought them in at the point of arrest. So you've got somebody there, you've got them, so they're not changing their story almost, because that happens a lot, where domestic violence is repeated because they don't feel the strength. The partner comes home after injunction, whatever, and they don't feel the strength to be able to
Can
do
I
it.
just ask you, if we're not erring into the operational here in some, should the PCC be involved in this kind of giving of advice to a Chief Constable? Do you think this is part of your role, gentlemen?
Absolutely, because the whole point, Chris, of having a PCC is you're dealing with crime reduction. And of course it's absolutely intrinsically involved in that.
These aren't things that the police are already thinking of.
The police are already thinking of how they're doing it, but there is best practice elsewhere that I think our current Chief Constable should be looking at.
Nick Clark.
Yeah, this is a most insidious crime. The majority of domestic violence is perceived to happen in poor areas, and that's just not true. That's where it's actually seen. In fact, I think across this county there's more domestic violence in South Cambs than there is in any other particular area. There is a thing called the Multi-Agency Referral Unit. There's a joint organisation between the County Council and the police set up for this very reason. It's underfunded at the moment, but it's made huge steps in making it much easier for people who suffer, both male and female, domestic violence to report it. And that's got to be key. If you can imagine in a relationship in your home where you believe you should be safe, if you're suffering and scared, to go outside your home and try and seek help from the police is a real tough ask. Because the next thing you're going to know, there's going to be a couple of burly policemen or women through the door, launching accusations everywhere. Your marriage is at risk, where you live is at risk, your future is at risk. So we need to work much more with this barrier unit and charities and signpost to other organisations where people can go and report their fears and how they feel, and allow those people to triage that back to the police if necessary. But of course some of this may not be for the police. Maybe some of it goes through to social services or what is appropriate and best for those victims.
Rupert. I don't think domestic violence is terrible, and every time I hear the figures about how many women do die every week, it just is awful. However, which, as the latest Archer's storyline has told us, recent story, it's not just violence, it's abuse too. I was disappointed with the storyline resorting to violence towards the end, rather than there being another way out of the abuse. And I did think it was a rather trite story that helped create other jeopardy elsewhere. Cambridgeshire is actually quite poor at this. The latest Peel report, they call it, shows that although they do have a very good team and are very enthusiastic, know what they're doing, they're being overwhelmed. The force is fighting the last war, not the right one, similarly with cybercrime and some other things. They built teams to a certain size, but not big enough to cope with the increase in crime. So, in terms of the question, is that the sort of thing that Police and Crime Commission does? Yes. You set broad priorities about areas that you'd like to see improvement. You help provide encouragement, funding if necessary, in a constructive way, consensual way with the force to help them move in the direction you want them to go.
Okay, we've got time for one quick question. Steve's going to choose one person there. And I'd ask you to be as brief as possible. Gentlemen.
My name is Barry Ashford. You've all mentioned the financial constraints within the force. One of the big savings could be in aligning pension payments, overtime, shift payments to those within the private sector. This would release vast amounts of money to the force. Would you be willing to put pressure on the government to do that?
Who's first? Jason Applewhite.
Regardless of whether I'm a Conservative and the current government is a Conservative, I don't always toe the party line, as people will tell you. What I will promise you is a fair deal for Cambridgeshire. And if there is an idea that needs the Home Secretary, senior ministers or the Prime Minister to be lobbied on, then I will do that on behalf of the residents of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. I think it's absolutely essential that we get every penny that is due to our area, and it was intimated earlier on when it comes to the formula around education. It was taken years under previous governments to actually get a government to acknowledge the fact that we have a different formula to everyone else, especially where we've got rural areas as well, which take a lot more cost to deliver those services. So if it needs a robust question to central government, then the answer is yes. If it makes sense, then I will go there and I will bang on the door.
Nick Clark.
You're absolutely right to raise the issue. The private sector has had to change the way it funds itself and its pensions for a large number of years. About 4 years ago, I looked into the local government pension scheme and to see what could be done to improve it, because A, it's got a black hole, and B, it eats an enormous amount of your council tax. And after spending an inordinate amount of time with some really expert people on this, I discovered there is absolutely nothing you can do about it. The local government pension scheme. I have to say, I think the fire and the police are in exactly the same position. So, we're looking at an immovable object, and would I address that as an issue nationally? Yes, I would, of course I would. But the way to do that, of course, will be to get an awful lot of my mates up and down the country, also as PCCs, to say, this is a serious issue, and by the way, the local government pension scheme is also in dire need of modernising. But I tell you now, will we see success in my lifetime? Oh, I wouldn't bet the farm on it.
Rupert.
The dichotomy of public and private sector is a false one. You have good organisations, you have bad organisations, you have large organisations that tend to be slow moving, small organisations more agile. Other than that, there's no real difference. I work for a large private sector organisation, BT. I see things that BT does that I wouldn't allow to happen in a local authority or anywhere else for that matter, but it's historical and all those things, and it's a large organisation. I've also seen stuff happening in National Police Improvement Agency, very agile, so it's not public-private. And I certainly think police officers would love it if we all got £14 million a year, and then on top of that a massive pension that was 4 times the threshold. But I don't think that's what you're asking for. One thing we touched on earlier about the issues of morale in the police force. Police officers who've been serving for some time signed up for the package in terms of what they did for a living, how they did it, the uniform, and indeed the benefits and the environment in which they worked. Changing that radically under their feet will do nothing for morale. The change in years of service has already caused many officers to have difficulty. The change in my overtime work among sergeants in particular, I know almost all the sergeants in Cambridgeshire do another piece of work at some other time as well to help pay for what they've learned to live on. So just changing the deal without consultation consensus is not the thing to do. Unless you are Jeremy Hunt, of course.
Dave Bagent, of course, 2 jobs is something firefighters have, isn't it?
Yeah, I think lots of people. Sorry, I've got a cold. It's terrible. Lots of people have 2 jobs, and there's no harm in doing that. You know, as long as you can do the 2 jobs. Police pensions are a very difficult area. They've already had their pension eroded, cut away from them after signing into a service that promised them a certain type of pension at the end of it. There is no pension pot as such. That money, as it comes in, goes straight out to police officers who have retired. And it's a constant drain on the police budget that they have to pay so much out of frontline costs to pension. But I'm really interested, sir, if I get elected, when I get elected, contact me and we'll sit down and talk about it.
Okay, thank you for the question. Sorry we've run out of time in terms of questions from the floor. One final flourish from the panel. They've got 30 seconds each to tell us why we should vote for them. Let's go in reverse order. Nick Clark.
Thank you. If you want a strong, no-nonsense approach to policing and more money spent on the frontline services, if you want to see more police officers, reduce speeding and a 101 phone service that works, if you want a zero-tolerance approach for low-level crime, antisocial behaviour and illegal drug supply, more transparency and accountability, and if you want someone who is able and experienced of fighting on the national stage for fair funding for our police force, then please vote for me.
Jason Abelwhite.
I've lived in this county all my life. It's a place that I love. It's a place that my family grew up in as well. I've given my life over to public service. And with your help on May the 5th, I would like to be your police and crime commissioner as a no-nonsense individual with a proven track record that will deliver on your behalf, that will ensure that our front line is protected, that will ensure victims come first and foremost in anything that the police do. And I will ensure that we will make Cambridgeshire a place where criminals will seek other areas in which to do their activities in.
Dave Bagent.
Yeah, I promise no miracles. I'm a practical person. I have an academic background more recently, and even more recently than that I've become political. What I can tell you is that I will do my very best to ensure that the public voice in policing is heard, And that's what the Commissioner's job really is.
Rupert Moss-Eccardt.
I know how to reduce crime, I can reduce crime in the area, I will make your police more connected to you, more accountable to you, and I know what 30 seconds looks like.
Well done, gentlemen. A round of applause, please. Before we go, I'd like to know, has anyone here changed their mind as a result of what they've heard tonight, or made up their mind as a result of what they heard?
Well, only one. I'm Peter Williams. I'm ex-Air Force. I'm a self-employed computer engineer, and I'd just like to ask the panel there, the police future.
Sorry, but we have to leave it, but thank you very much.
What would their opinions be?
Thank you very much.
The European.
Has anyone changed their mind as a result of hearing? Okay. Quick show of hands. Those that would vote for Nick Clark.
Not saying.
No, if you'd like to, if not. Jason Ablewhite? Okay, that's 2 for Jason. Dave Bajan? Some good, healthy half a dozen there. And Rupert?
I'm going to vote for myself.
Okay. Thank you all for coming. Thanks indeed to the panel, and you'll be able to hear part of this on BBC Radio Cambridgeshire. Thank you and good night.